Welcome to Cybersecurity Refined and Feral, where refinement meets chaos in the digital world. We invite you to join your co-hosts Candy Alexander and Kalen Sullivan in another open conversation on topics related to cybersecurity.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Refined and Feral. I'm your host, Candy Alexander, and I'm joined by my co-host and daughter, Kalen Sullivan.
Hello, everyone. Today's topic is something that we really think you're gonna find interesting. Hopefully, it will get you to think about the impact on our society that artificial intelligence is going to have.
When we look at the societal impact of artificial intelligence through a purely cognitive lens, the risks go far beyond job displacement, the algorithm bias, and data privacy issues. We are fundamentally altering how humans process information. How are we to maintain attention, and ultimately, how can we construct reality?
Exactly. So the conversation has to shift from simply tech literacy, so just knowing how to use technology and AI, to true cognitive agency. So understanding exactly how these tools are changing us, and there's no one better equipped to help guide us through this mental landscape than our guest today.
That's right. And in joining us are the leaders of the Cognitive Security Institute. First, Dr. Matt Canham, who we've had on previously, the Institute's executive director. Matt is a cognitive neuroscientist and a former FBI supervisory special agent with over 2 decades of experience researching human technology integration, neurosecurity frameworks, and online influence campaigns.
Hello.
Is- And sitting right alongside him is Ben Sawyer, an applied neuroscience scientist human factors engineer. Oh, human factors engineer. So sorry, Ben. The chair of the board of the Cognitive Security Institute. Ben's award winning research focuses on human machine optimization, preserving human decision making autonomy as AI scales. And alongside Matt, exposing how AI models can actively manipulate human psychology through their famous Evil Digital Twin research series. Matt and Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So when we think about the society, the impacts on society with the use of AI, let's back up a little bit and look at, is there a hidden cost to the cognitive shift? Again, everybody's running like mad people in adopting AI. I am surprised to hear like all these ads that I never would think saying that they use AI. And what kind of impact do you see this having on the public today?
Well,
I think maybe I
you want to
can
go ahead?
take that
Yeah.
for starters, and then Matt. I think there's a natural follow-on out of your work. First of all, I think trust is the word that you're talking about almost immediately.
Mhm.
I do a lot of work with human machine trust, and certainly it's always been fraught. uh, it's not the first technology that has had major impacts on our trust, but I think one of the interesting things about this moment is that um, the level of fidelity of what these machines can create exceeds our discrimination. So we all remember this moment not so long ago when people were saying, well, if you're looking at a person and trying to decide if they're real, like, look at the corners of their glasses and their eyes and look for all these little cues of a deep fit. And we are completely past that moment. That is done. We
Mhm.
are at the point where there is potentially a level of expertise in humans that can determine if something is a deep fake, but it approaches interesting other questions like, is this diamond real? And the answer among the best experts in the world is maybe. Lab grown diamonds are very good. And natural grown diamonds are occasionally not so good. So there's some overlap, some fuzzy.
Mhm.
There's some fuzzy in terms of our ability to determine the truth of practically any experience that we have that isn't directly in front of us right now. And that's an interesting new fact in the world. Something that I think, by the way, those of us who come from times when, um, the world was better established in terms of what fake and real and what could be trusted are more excited about. If you talk to a 16-year-old, they're a lot less excited about this because it's just the way the world has always been for them. I think the other thing maybe to put there is that this is not the last time or the first time that humans have dealt with this problem. Photography caused this problem. Portraiture caused this problem when it was first introduced in such a way that it looked realistic. And then people realized that artists could lie. And no, the Duchess does not look like that. Um, this is an old issue, and I don't think it's fair to say the AI is impacting us. What's much truer and much more interesting is that it's dynamic. We are interacting with all of these new things as a species. We are shaping this technology to us. It is shaping us at the same time. And some of the oldest professions are getting a giant boost from this technology, not the least of which is fraud. Fraud
Mm-hmm.
is having a moment. And very, very old playbooks have a rather impressive new set of rules that, you know, um, I think there are stories about tricksters who had magic on their side that could do amazing things that are suddenly very much a reality. That's interesting. Um, Matt is a very deep expert in this space. And I think one of the amazing things right now is the capabilities here aren't just eroding public trust. They're arming people whose job it is to prey on the public with a really exciting new set of tools. Um, Matt, you want to?
Yeah. Well, and so this is really leading to the emergence of two distinctly different threats. One is the enablement of bad actors, as Ben had mentioned, with the added capabilities. This is massively ramped up the capabilities of criminals using things like phishing as an attack vector or advanced forms of phishing like vishing with a V, voice phishing, or we've even seen cases now of video call phishing,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes referred to as zishing with a Z. Um, and so this is really kind of more of the same, but more advanced. I think what's also interesting, though, is that uh, with the emergence of AI and the capabilities and the reliance that people are starting to have on these systems, and maybe more importantly, the belief that and trust, as Ben was alluding to, that people put into these systems, we're actually starting to redefine what security is, because traditionally in cybersecurity, um, malicious actors would gain access to a resource and either deny access to that resource or expose that resource or use that resource to um, affect some sort of action, like they would get banking credentials, let's say, and then have access to a banking account. But what we're starting to see now is that some of these models are actually changing uh, not only people's belief structures about certain things, but that people are starting to offload cognition and cognitive processes
Mm-hmm.
onto these, and this is very concerning in several ways. So, to give an analogy, navigation systems have, by and large, really atrophied people's spatial abilities to a large degree. And so this is one type of cognitive function. But when we're talking about things like reasoning itself, which is one of the areas that we're seeing, um, this is really problematic because it erodes people's ability to actually critically evaluate the information that is coming
Mm-hmm.
into them. And I think we're still a little early to know what the effects of that are going to be. However, Ben does research with AI natives and may be able to speak to that further.
Sure. Um, the way it changes cognition in humans, I think, is fascinating. And this is old and new. We all somewhere have a grandmother or grandfather who's concerned about the fact that we can't
Hmm.
navigate with GPS. And that person themselves, interestingly, may be angry about that and also unable to navigate with GPS. And there's an interesting difference between a person who grew up with modern navigation and never learned the original set of skills and maybe never even built the maps. You know, if you've grown up with this, the question of whether you know your surroundings well enough to build the mental map and draw a picture on a piece of paper, the answer is you might very well not be able to. You've always lived with a voice in your ear that has all of that, and you have very rationally offloaded that cognition to that thing. But that person who grew up with that skill set themselves may have lost that ability. And this is something we call de-skilling. There's an old, beautiful literature in it that is really very important. Maybe the most pertinent to all of us here is whether your pilot can land your plane. I think anybody
Hmm.
here is in planes cares about that. So I like it because it gets right to the heart of the matter. Will you
Hmm.
survive your flight?
Hmm.
The answer is that it's really hard to keep pilots able to land planes because planes are really good at landing themselves now, and that works 99 plus several nines% of the time.
Right.
When it doesn't work, however, there's a really interesting question of whether the pilot can take over and save the situation, often on very short notice, because these things don't like say, I'm going to fail. And when that happens, there's always a conversation. And when I mean when an accident happens, there's always a conversation about what are we doing about this? And the answer is we're training these pilots. We're putting them in synthetic situations,
Hmm.
they land planes on a simulator, but they continue to have a job in which a part of their job is not to land planes.
Right.
There's some real interesting tension here. And humans are actually incapable of remaining skilled at things we don't do.
Right.
That's actually great. That's the way human cognition should work. You would really dislike a world in which you remain skilled at all the things you'd ever learned because there would be a lot of competition in some ways that aren't very helpful for you as a human. And you need to be able to do the things you need to do well.
Right.
What I guess I'm coming to here is that de-skilling is a part of what's going on with AI. And I
Right.
think it's really interesting to consider what we're going to surrender to AI. You know, we were all ready for a future in which the machines did all the labor and we got to sit around and, I don't know, paint or, do art. But weirdly, we live in a world in which I'm a little concerned to show modern AI to my 7-year-old
Hmm.
because he's having so much fun learning to draw.
Hmm.
And the very moment that I show him that all of that struggle that he's engaged in, learning to draw a person and put clothes on them and make that all work is instantly resolvable with something that he could have access to all the time, he will stop engaging in that struggle. So there's a lot of interesting tensions here around de-skilling, and they touch not only really important technical skills
Hmm.
and really important human skills, like can I trust what's in front of me, as Matt was talking
Right.
about, but they also touch some of the things that we imagine makes us human.
Right.
We did not expect the machines would be so good at art and music quite this early. And if you have not listened to the top 10
Hmm.
AI generated musical hits of last year, you should go find them.
Right.
They are better than you hope they will be.
So let's go deeper because this is where I personally have a lot of concerns, and that's in the de-skilling, as you had termed it. We all know those stories about the calculators when they came out, right? It's like, oh, everybody who's going to start using calculators is not going to be able to perform simple math. And, was that really a terrible thing to your point of de-skilling? So I rely on my calculator. And that, the old adage was like, or the old timers would say, well, you're not always going to have a calculator. Well, I just saw a meme on Facebook last night. It said, yeah, for all of those that said we would not have a calculator on us at all time, we showed them, right? Our phones. So let's explore again this whole impact that if we had a crystal ball, how is this going to affect us as a human race? To your point, a lot of thinking is happening through artificial intelligence, by artificial intelligence, what does that mean to us in our future? Does that remove our joy of learning and experiencing, to your point, Ben, of your son, going through the joy of learning to draw or to play music, or to, more importantly, from a scholastical perspective, what does this do to our critical thinking? Anyone?
Ben?
Sure. I think to answer that, maybe we should talk about workforce for a second.
Okay.
I think that's the right frame here. So there's a really old technology called a digital twin. A digital twin is a big model of something that you care a lot about, like let's say a nuclear power plant. We all care about that because, again, if things go sideways, they go sideways for all of us, right? So somebody at some point built a spreadsheet with all the things that are vital to keep that thing from going critical, and that spreadsheet evolved into a very interesting model of the whole plant, right? To make sure that there won't be a terrible disaster. And in that, there are humans, right? And really basic humans at the beginning, like operator is at post, operator is not at post. We can all agree that matters, right? But recently, those human nodes in these big systems have gotten much more detailed. You can imagine that human operator at post, not at post, your immediate desire is, I'd like to know more, right? Have they slept? What does this human do? How are they vital? If, Mary, subs in for Laura, is that going to be okay? These sorts of questions really matter in these systems. And these systems, as they have gained information, one of the nicest ways to give them information is to take everything that Laura does on every control panel and gather that information. Because when you have that, you can answer the questions programmatically. Now we know exactly what Laura does. We know in which order she presses the buttons and how she does it versus one of her colleagues. What is interesting about this moment of generative is that some of those models are now able to produce work output. And that's an entirely defensible and important feature, because if Laura is not at her desk, you would like to have a fail-safe where a system can do what she would do, right? You want that decision not just support, but you'd like to be able to turn on that virtual version of Laura. So now we get to a really interesting place, right? If we can switch on the virtual version of Laura, and that can do a certain percentage of her work, what comes next? Well, even if just Laura is involved in that loop, she might rationally stop doing some portion of her work. She certainly doesn't enjoy every part of what she does. But if you step back to her employer, you're looking at that percentage of all the things that the system can do that Laura does. And at a certain point, you might need a lot less Lauras, right? And yet it goes both directions. Also, as Laura gives up her autonomy to that system, and that system becomes a proxy for her, she is de-skilling. She's losing those abilities. And when she trains her replacement, it's kind of not a part of her job, right? She's like, well, the system does all these things and I do these remaining pieces. I bring it in this direction in some ways because what is happening here is pushing in all directions, right? The machine is pushing to get better and better at being Laura. Laura is pushing to give more and more things to the machine because she feels like she has too much to do, like every human in every position like hers in the universe, right? The employer's incentives are to absolutely encourage that. It's good for them in a variety of ways, some of which are quite benevolent. You do want a fallback, Laura, and you can't always get one instantly. And in our critical, power plant situation, you need one instantly. So all of these aligned incentives create a feedback loop that means that more and more of the expertise that used to live with the human, more of the decisions that used to be held by the human, are increasingly held by these systems that are a proxy for the human. And as time goes on, we forget that those systems were a proxy for the human. Just as we've forgotten that calculators are a proxy for human mathematical intent. If you talk to a 14-year-old right now, and you said, what was the giant impact that the calculator had on humanity that made everyone freak out? They might not have the foggiest clue. And if they did, it would more likely be because someone had told them a story than they deduced it from first principles, because math of that type is not something a human does. And here's the fundament of it all, or maybe the firmament in this case, like the level at which human effort is necessary, in which we as humans agree human effort should be expended, is changing right now in a big way. And that will make a lot of people angry. But more interestingly, I think we have some choice in this moment. In the moment of flex, you get to make decisions. As a species, we get to make decisions about what we keep and what we give away.
Yes.
There are things that calculators do that we have kept as a species for humans to do. But at the same time, if you work in math as a discipline, the era in which a human could work on the hard problems of mathematics as an individual and have a hope, even a brilliant one, of making great progress, there's discussion about whether that's coming to a close.
Hmm.
Maybe
So
math isn't something we do.
Right. And so what you're talking about is all extremely logical in that it's evolution. It's truly evolution. Whether that entity, digital twin, is a digital or a human, right? It's a transfer and evolution of that role and or that being. So if what we're experiencing through this technological adoption of artificial intelligence is nothing but natural evolution and growth, two questions for you. What does that mean for our directional intent, or is there not intent? And do we have a say in what that future self is through evolution, and how do we make that happen?
Look, just because I sound like I think it's very logical doesn't mean it doesn't scare me deeply. And scare me for my son. And it doesn't mean I won't fight it. And I
Right.
mean, when I say that, it's not to say that I'm here fighting it, but I am. All of us in our own spaces are fighting it. And I think the fight is the interesting thing. Like, none of this equilibrium comes about because, like, gently, historically, right? But this is a big change, and there's some really interesting fights emerging on it. Matt, you want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the, I think, more interesting areas where the fight is emerging is you may have seen in the news recently that several tech companies have essentially laid off large swaths of their workforce because they were able to replace that workforce with
Mm-hmm.
essentially human digital twins, which were built from the security monitoring systems that were on the company systems that those employees were using. So, as the employees are using these systems and going about their daily tasks, all of that is being recorded. All that digital exhaust is out there, and it's being used to train these models as well as monitor for security threats, right? And this is having a very interesting effect societally, because what we're starting to see is the emergence of counterculture
Mm-hmm.
and a almost like a Luddite response, where deliberate attempts to sabotage some of these models are starting to emerge. And Ben and I have seen this in several forms now. People discussing ways to inject. Um, Not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily noise per se. I mean, in some cases that's the case, but sometimes it's very deliberate disinformation or attempts at prompt injection to directly attack these models. And so I think that this is a very interesting point that we're getting to, which is this era of data poisoning, right? And so this happens both at an individual level with employees, but it also is happening with malicious actors who are trying to attack AI agents that are servicing other companies. But we're also seeing this on a nation state scale, where you have opposing nations that are putting in their own narrative, or in some cases, deliberately false narratives into streams where they'll be picked up, by a model. And so we've started talking about sort of data bombs, or you know pre-established history, where we're seeing actors put data into places where the models will pick this stuff up with the deliberate intention that it's picked up, say, 4 or 5 years from now. And so this kind of changes how we think about the whole digital environment and these artificial agents, because now we want to think about, what do we want to put into place now so that we set the narrative that we want 5 years from now.
Yes.
I think one of the more interesting manifestations of this, and actually we have a blog post about this at the CSI site and our LinkedIn site, is that China is doing almost like a Belt and Road initiative right now with AI agents. And so what they're offering for free or very low price are access to personal tutors that are built from the models that are coming out of China. And you can imagine how having a personal tutor that you're growing up with that will teach you about a range of subjects could be very helpful, but it could also steer your perception of the world
Yeah.
to be consistent with the originators of that model. And then I also just want to touch very briefly on a point that you mentioned about evolution, which is that it's not something that we think about a lot, but these algorithms, not just AI, but things that have been around for 10 or 15 years, are having a very definitive effect on our biological evolution, in that someone nowadays is much, much more likely to procreate with someone from a different race than they are with someone from a different political party. And the idea is that this is in large part driven by the algorithms of these dating sites. So political is just one dimension, right? But there are other dimensions in which the data algorithms are very directly having an impact on our biological evolution as well.
I'm so happy I missed Tinder.
So,
I was a little bit envious when it first came out. I was like, that sounds really cool. And then everybody since then has just told me that I dodged not even just a bullet, just a lot of, I work with the kids a lot. And when I say that, I shouldn't call them kids. They're adults. They are people just entering this world of AI. I use this term AI natives.
mhm.
But the interesting thing is, any of us can be an AI native. The definition is borrowed from a much older term, which is internet natives.
Mhm.
And I am actually an internet native, which means that I was there when they ripped out the card catalogs in the high school. And I saw the moment when the internet became a mainstream resource, when Burger King put it in all of their restaurants because that was the cool thing to do. I mean, that moment was the end of the world, if anyone remembers.
Yep.
It was the absolute end of the world, and society was going to fall apart and be, if we were lucky, remade. And so here we are. We were lucky. It was remade. And it's interesting, your divide. I mean, like, that was a real question, Candy, like whether the internet would just cause enough political and other types of strife that there would be a major fracture in society. And I don't think, in retrospect, the answer is that it did not. It almost
So I want to explore this a little bit, because you guys are way too like smart and way too much information, and like I want to slow this conversation down, pick out some of these, because not everybody in our listening audience are neuroscientists. So let's push. I understand the pushback from the workforce, one of the items Matt brought up, and yes, absolutely. We have that. We see that everywhere, that everybody's afraid they're going to be replaced by AI. That's a fact we need to deal with. That's separate from where I want this conversation to go. I want to come back to the counterculture and the data poisoning. I agree with you, Matt. That is happening everywhere. And I, just by my nature, always have tried to understand the motive. And so thank you for pointing out that the motive for the data poisoning to manipulate the models and I can't even say it, whatever, is because of nation states. There's various hacktivism. So there's lots of motives there. One thing I really want to dig into, however, is something you and Ben brought up, because I've just finished a book on Facebook called Careless People. Now, you both had danced around this, how technology is manipulating, or is a tool, right, to manipulate the way people think, act, and live their lives. And I believe firmly that, yes, Ben, it did start with that damn thing called the internet, but it exploded with social media. And I know I picked on Facebook, but it also happens on LinkedIn or any platform. And it's absolutely terrifying. And so I guess my concern is that this is going to be exasperated into AI. That same manipulation of us being humans, right, are going to be manipulated by AI through downstream, previous stream, data poisoning, and things like that. So love your take on, dig into this a little bit. And how the heck, we'll follow up with how the heck can we be aware, cognizant of it, and protect ourselves of it? Do we have means to do that? We might not even. What do y'all think about that?
So let me be really clear. These things are going to manipulate us in ways that made the old social media algorithms look primitive. If you thought that was manipulative, you haven't seen anything yet. And let me just kind of fast forward a little bit, because I think where we're going probably very soon, within the next 5 to 10 years easily, is we're probably going to end up in a future where kids will grow up with these. These will be their personal companions from the very first time that they can remember anything. And there's an analog of this, right? That we already see in certain households. Parents will give a pad, an iPad or whatever to a child, and that's become the modern equivalent of setting them down in front of the TV. Well, now that pad is going to have that AI embedded within it, right? And it's going to know everything about that child. And so let's look at what's happened so far already, right? We've had instances of smart toys, right, that are meant to, say, monitor a child in the crib being hacked by malicious actors, and where they're putting out messaging that is at best weird, and at some cases deliberately malicious to kids in their crib, speaking through these child toys that are connected to the internet, right? Well, I think we're going to see things like that from the AI perspective. Now, let's think about how this coalesces with surveillance capitalism, because these things are being driven by different motives. So, to come back to first principles, AI moves to whatever direction it's optimized for, right? And this comes back to something called the paperclip dilemma, right? You have an AI that's optimized to make paper clips, and suddenly it's extracting the iron out of humans to make more paper clips, and thereby causes the apocalypse through the paperclip apocalypse. And and so the question then becomes, what are these algorithms or what are these agents being optimized for, right? And one of the ways that we're seeing them being optimized for right now today is for engagement. And you don't engage people or keep them engaged by pissing them off. And so one of the sort of quieter sort of threats from the models currently is coming from sycophancy. And this is where the model will feed into your own biases or misconceptions or what have you that you have, rather than countering and saying, no, that's actually kind of a dumb idea, you shouldn't think about it that way. It's a yes and approach, right? And so this can cause people to go down erroneous paths and actually end up wasting a lot of time and energy on something that isn't fruitful. Okay, so when you have a child that grows up with something like that, what happens? And not only that, but to come back to this trust issue, that child is going to trust that AI companion far more than they're going to trust other, authority figures that might appear in their lives. So, that probably wasn't a ray of optimism, but but that's where I think we're going.
I think you're right.
I actually have something that you had said that reminded me of like once the internet started, I feel like there's been a death of expertise because people have access to all this information out there and they're like, well, I read, so my doctor's wrong. I fear that this is just going to explode and expedite the death of expertise.
I
What do
think
you
you
guys think of that?
like this. The job of these things is to provide expertise, or the job of the internet was. And that's not to say you're wrong. That was the job of the internet. That was what it was supposed to do, was that it was going to unite all the information of humanity, and then I think we would all sing together or something. But instead, really, you should have. There was a moment where it looked like we were going to get this incredible ability to have all of humanity pool its knowledge and then solve all this stuff that humanity wants solved. It was like the opposite of Pandora's box was what this was supposed to be. The internet did not turn out to be that, right?
No.
AI probably is not there to be an expert. AI is there to talk to you. I mean, look, coding, the most defensible thing for AI. AI is great at it. There's a whole interesting thread going on Reddit, which is how much of all of the back and forth between programmers and their AI is actually building code, and how much of it is that back and forth.
Yes.
And the numbers are nuts. 80% chat.
Yeah.
So what is Anthropic selling? Is Anthropic selling a coding thing, or is Anthropic selling a chatbot that produces code? There's some really interesting questions about whether in programming, these things are actually more labor-saving devices, or whether they're just really sticky things that aren't actually labor-saving devices. They just feel like it.
So,
and that, I think, is at the heart of this. Like, if you want to talk about expertise, you expect that thing that you ask to give you an expert opinion, but it's not there to do that. It is there to talk to you and to make you like it.
So that's interesting, because what it brings to mind to me is, again, that question I asked earlier about cognitive thinking, or I'm sorry, critical skilled thinking, right? And when people say to me, I think we're going to, pardon the directness of this, I think we're going to get dumber because of AI. And I kind of laugh and snicker, because if I look at all the chat conversations, to your point, Ben, of my AI assistant, it really changes the way I think. In other words, I have to go through and change the way I think to be, I need to be extremely explicit in my conversations or directions. I can't say to whatever AI assistant I have, create me a infographic explaining AI governance in these 5, and period. I have to be explicit and say, create me a infographic of AI governance using the 5 pillars and showing the interrelationship, blah, 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 blah. So again, I'm not getting dumber. I'm getting more explicit and definitive and focused in my direction. I would assume that that's similar to, developers and software engineers. They have to be very explicit of what they want that end result to be and use these data points, and you go figure it out AI. So
I
I
feel like that's just a different way to have a conversation. Like, that's it, like
yeah.
conversational intelligence versus like retention of information,
Wow.
which is like, because I can Google anything, I don't remember facts anymore.
Type of help that is historically reserved for people with the money to have it and is now available much more widely through this technology. I mean, one of the cool things that can come from this is a lot of the things that have historically involved hiring experts and helpers to do these things,
Yes.
where you can say, look, I, sat down with my assistant and outlined the whole slideshow to them. No, I have no idea how to use PowerPoint. And by the way, using PowerPoint, I don't know if that's a virtuous skill. I don't know if the part of my brain that is good at PowerPoint is doing me any good. I don't know if it makes me smarter. I would argue quite the contrary. I've worked in the Department of Defense at the moment when they were most happy about PowerPoints, and I don't think anybody thought it was making anyone smarter. The Gen X, famously didn't respond to TV commercials. And same true for millennials, that television advertising started not working as well. And there's all of this conversation about like, maybe they were resistant to it somehow psychologically. I think what's much more likely is that Gen X was pissed off enough that they built the technologies to get rid of commercials. There's a bunch of amazing technologies that chiseled that out of TV and changed TV from the endless slot machine that it had become into something curated and something perhaps more virtuous. So I think this is to highlight sort of two ends of what I think is going on there. On the one hand, yeah, I mean, if AI does get rid of the necessity to spend 10,000 hours learning to play an instrument in order to provide a virtuoso performance in it, and a person can get a symphony out of their head, that's a big, complicated argument. But in the end, I might like their symphony.
Right.
And at the same time, I think that a lot of the parts of this technology that are deeply unpleasant to humans will be carved away by humans, the same way that the TiVo carved away pieces of what the medium of television had become, provided we leave the right to do that in the hands of people. And that's one of the interesting things, is the reason that humans were able to do what they did to television was because as a society, and as many societies around the globe, we all stood up and said, no, we fucking hate television. Let's fix that. And let's give these companies the right to build something that fights back. We could give those rights away in this moment. Companies at this moment well understand that the movements of the moment could carve away their ability to produce this technology exactly as they wish to. And they are making very proactive moves to try to stop that. Although, interestingly, I think in some ways, some of these companies are making proactive moves to try to hand away some of that power, because they understand as well as everyone does that this is a big, weird technology, and that maybe they don't want to be the only company holding it when the crowd of dissatisfied citizens shows up, bearing the traditional pitchforks and, torches, which work well regardless of AI. So I do think that there's a really interesting type of tension around what you're talking about. I don't know which way it'll go. I know which side I stand on. I would like this to become a benevolent technology that means I never have to look at PowerPoint again and can just put my ideas out into the world. At the same time, I have great sympathy for a violinist who has spent 10,000 hours to produce something beautiful. Complicated space.
So does that, you just said something that just prompted a thought in my mind. So, it's kind of like, the appreciation of that experience of the 10,000 hours to be a virtuoso musician versus, using AI. It's a choice. And I think that that is what we're talking about. I want to, we're coming to the close here. I want to ask each of you. We know that this is going to lead us through an evolution. We don't know where it's going, but we have fears of things. Let me repeat that. It's evolving into something we don't know, but we also know where we don't want it to go. How can we proactively, if that's possible, begin to steer that into the direction away from those bad things? And I guess the root of what I'm talking about comes down to something I'll label as AI safety for humankind. How do we do that? Where do we begin?
So, one thing I want to point out just very quickly is how dangerous electricity is. Electricity kills thousands of people every year. It's a horrible technology, but we also couldn't live without it nowadays, right? And one of the things that I think is very important, at least in the US here, is the United Laboratories, right? That directly evolved out of the emergence of the dangers associated with electricity, right? House fires, electrocution, all this. Now things have to be certified by a private nonprofit set of laboratories, right? And so this is where the Cognitive Security Institute is really trying to insert, is that we can be that evaluative and protective organization, maybe not of the AI models themselves, but of the humans that are using the AI models to make sure that we're preserving the important aspects of cognition that need to be there. So, Ben, what was your take on that?
I think that's a very good take on it. I think to extend it just a little, we live in a moment where humans and machines are subject to some very similar forces. And so, yeah, a lot of the same arguments that can sway a human can sway a machine. If I were to take any one of you and make it your entire job to please others, you would get weird. And that is exactly what every frontier model does right now. That's how the reinforcement cycle works. At the same time, if I was to take somebody right now who's 16 or 17 and have told them that the world was ending since they were about 12 when the pandemic began, that's a weird place to be in as well. And
Mhm.
so I think there's some interesting things on both sides. We need to very likely consider what we're building and how we're raising this technology in some ways. And I don't want to humanize it too much, but I do want to say that there's some weird monkey's paw to the game we're playing right now of making something that we love uh, very intentionally. At the same time, I think it's worth considering that the answer to your question probably lies in people who haven't known this other world, because they are looking at the world that we live in and addressing it from first principles, which none of us in this room can do. We're all too old. I'm sorry. If you're older than about 16 right now, you sort of can't. But we all are going to be seeing it impact our lives in fresh ways. One thing I often talk about is that we're going to hit all these contexts that we've never hit that now have been transformed by generative AI. If you are stepping into cancer care right now, today, you're stepping into a world that has been revolutionized by these models in so many different ways. Everything from how you interact with your physicians to the care you receive. You don't know what the world before looked like, I hope, because I hope you didn't have cancer previously. Likewise, if you have a new child, you're going to be a new parent in this world. Are
Mhm.
you going to ask generative AI for parenting advice? Yes, you are. Because in that moment where you need fast advice, you're just not going to have another resource, just as you would have once turned to Google. So I think there's this interesting benevolence that we can put to everybody who is in these new places. We're all AI natives in so many different settings. all of us, I say in one of my talks, it really brings down the audience, is all of us are going to be AI natives of end-of-life care. That's coming for all of us. And the last words we speak might be to a machine. And that's a fine thing, because previously, the last words you spoke might have been to a machine that couldn't speak back, right? Just sat and beeped. But I think the new model's better, frankly. Sit down and talk with somebody who's 16 or 17 right now. If you're an employer, go find those young people in your organization and bring them into the conversation, because just like the internet natives, and I'll bet there's a lot of them in your audience, because we were spending a lot of time on the internet and the kids were not okay, but we knew some things that other people didn't know. And these young people do too. And maybe best of all, they can see the world right now for what it really is. Whereas a lot of us are trapped in this retrospective moment where we have a little nostalgia mixed up with our decision-making that maybe isn't helping. This genie is probably not going back into the lamp, right?
Yeah. I think that was a perfect way for us to wrap this up. What a perfect way to end it. Ben and Matt, thank you so much for talking with us today. I always say to all our guests, we could talk for hours about this stuff, but we definitely could. And yeah, Candy.
Yeah. So again, I agree. Thank you so much. I would love to have you back again sometime and continue this conversation as things evolve and see, you know, where we're going off the track and all of that. I just like to be very proactive in regards to these things. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you both for joining us today. So for those of our listeners, please be sure to check Ben and Matt's profiles out on LinkedIn, speaking of social media, and be sure to check out the Cognitive Security Institute. They really do some amazing things over there. So thank you for all you do in that space as well. Again, to our listeners, if you could like, share, give us a thumbs up, we would really very much appreciate it. And until next time, stay secure, stay refined,
And don't be afraid to get a little bit feral.